Hi, this is the recording for the population ecology lecture. Populations and community actually are in the same chapter, but I'll have a separate recording for community. So we're starting the unit on ecology and evolution. And ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and their environment. And there's actually multiple levels of ecology that scientists specialize in. So we've been talking mainly about tissues and cells within one individual organism and looking at their specialties. But there's other scientists who actually study groups of the same population. So a population is a group of the same species of organisms that live in the same place at the same time. So they will be interbreeding. They will, so you can actually study how that population changes over time. And that's what we'll focus on today. Next time we'll focus on communities, and communities are populations that occupy the same area. So that includes multiple species that interact with each other. And then we will move on to ecosystems, and ecosystem actually brings in a community and all the non-living components of that area. So we're talking about the sun, the weather, the air, the water. And then finally, we'll go into the biosphere and look at all the different biomes, terrestrial and aquatic biomes that affect the global biosphere. And then we'll also mention some of the big global changes and problems that are ongoing. All right. So today is, or this lecture is about populations. And again, populations is one group or one species that are living together. And you may know that the census came out this year, and the census, they're trying to figure out where people are living, how big your family is, what are the ages of the people. And so just like the census does for humans in the United States, we're trying to figure out the same type of questions, but dealing with specific animals or specific plants. So again, there's some major things that population biologists study, and that would be density, distribution, and growth. Okay. So when we talk about population size, that seems pretty simple. You're just wanting to know how many individuals there are in that one population in this one area. And then density is how many people, or sorry, excuse me, how many individuals of that same species lives in one particular area size. Okay, so with humans, you have to base it on somebody filling out the survey and answering all the questions. But with animals, that gets to be much harder because you can't ask them. So one of the things people do is they can just go around and try to count as many of that particular population as they can. So here you can see these are little prairie dogs, and they come out every so often, and so you can actually see the family unit, and you can just count them. Okay, you may have to do this multiple times to make sure you count all of them. Okay, another possibility is a biologist will actually figure out a particular area, a little square area, and then they'll count all this, all the individuals of that one species that they're trying to study, and then based on that numbers per like square foot, then they could then extrapolate to how many per 100 square foot or something. Okay, and then with creatures that actually migrate or move around, one of the things that happens is you could actually label them. And so you've heard of maybe the mark and recapture method. So we used to actually use tags, but now they can even put in GPS chips into the animals and then have that be followed by a computer. Okay, so when I first came to California, I actually was part of the Monarch Project that was done by the LA Natural History Museum. And so we actually went looking for monarch butterflies. So overnight they would actually roost in these big tall eucalyptus trees, and they would sleep. And so in the morning, you'd go very early in the morning when there's still a lot of dew and the butterflies are too wet to fly. So you shake the tree and all these butterflies will flutter down to the ground. And then we put these little tiny address labels onto the butterfly wings, and it was small enough that it didn't actually damage or distress the butterflies, and then they would fly. And so it turns out monarch butterflies actually migrate to Mexico, and along the way, you know, sometimes they would get hit by trucks or cars or whatever, and if somebody sees it and sees a little label, then they would actually mail back the butterfly to the LA Natural History Museum. And that's actually how we figured out the migration route of the California monarch butterflies all the way down to Mexico and then coming back. Okay, so that was kind of cool. So the other big thing that biologists will look at is species distribution pattern, and so in this picture you can see that some population seems to be grouped in clusters, and then there's other penguins or there's species like penguins where they seem to be standing, you know, a certain distance apart from each other, so they're very, very uniform distribution, and then others that seem like they're totally randomly distributed. So in nature, which of these do you think is the most common? And I'll give you a big hint. If you look at United States, think of our biggest cities in United States. Where are they located? Are they randomly located throughout the whole country, or are they in very specific, you know, every 200 miles you have a big city? Or are they clumped? So big cities like New York, Miami, New Orleans, Chicago, Houston, San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and Seattle. So those are the big cities. So you can see that they're actually grouped, or they exist in places where there's really big shipping ports. Okay. And so just like in nature, most populations are going to be clumped close to natural resources if they're living on land. If they're living on land, if it's in the water, then they you know, they get to move around. All right. So one of the main things that that population biologists also study is they want to know something about the population dynamics. Okay, so they want to know, how does the population size and age change over time? So in this case, we're looking mainly at size. So you can understand, if you increase the number of births, that will increase your population size. If you have more deaths, then you're going to go down. If you have immigration, you're going to increase. If you have emigration, the population size is going to decrease. Okay, so we see this, and in California, you obviously know, there's a lot of immigration coming in, and so that is one of the ways that the population increases. Okay, but there's something else as well, and that is survivorship. So if you ever go to buy life insurance, okay, so if you bought life insurance and I bought life insurance for the same, let's say for $1 million policy, who would have to pay more? Would it be you or would it be me? So hopefully you guys understand, it would be me, right? I would have to pay a lot more. And that's because statistically, when they look at humans and they look at the ages, they can actually predict, based on past incidents, how many people survived that particular age group. Okay, so you can see here we have, and don't memorize this, I'm just trying to show you. So you can see for United States, for childhood, we have a 15% mortality, 1.15 mortality rate. And then in your teenage years, because of driving, then it actually increases. But then it's pretty good until you hit about 70, 80, 90 years old, and then you're going to see a lot more mortality during for those age groups. Okay, so survivorship means the opposite, right? It's looking at, so who's going to survive? What are the chances you survive? And so if you plot that, this is called a survivorship because the y-axis here is the percent of survivors, and then here you can see the age groups. Okay, and you can see that it changes, and also changes according to the country. But in general, for a developed country, we have really good survivorship through our childhood, and then it's only until you hit senior citizen age that you're going to start seeing that people are going to a high percentage will start to die off. Okay, so that's the human survivorship curve, and so I'll come back to that. But anyway, so we do study this for humans. We also study this for animals. All right. Okay. The next couple of slides is trying to show you about population size or population growth. Okay. So at any one point, we're going to measure the size of the population. So like we can look at the population change of Fullerton. So we can measure, how many people live here today. We can go back, 10 years before, and 10 years before that, and 10 years before that. And you can actually start seeing the population growth from, the 1800s or 1900s or whatever. So you can actually plot that. So these two pictures are from your textbook, and they're trying to show you. So let's say if you had a bacteria cell or yeast cell, a unicellular organism, and you gave them like plenty of food. Okay, so give them a big gallon of milk and let them take off, and you'll see that they will double and double their population, and it will go up and up and up. So it's going to be exponential. Okay, and it'll keep on going exponential for quite a while. But if you look at in nature, what happens is you do sometimes see very big exponential growth, but at some point it's going to flatten out, and it seems to reach this plateau. And so we call this so this type of growth is going to eventually be called the logistic growth. Okay, so for any population, if you have perfect conditions, you will get unregulated growth, exponential growth. But at some point there will be environmental factors that will limit how that population can keep on growing. It might be like not enough resources, or so you guys need to do the basic. You need to have food, you need to have water, you need to have air, you need to have shelter. But the other thing is you need to be able to get rid of your waste, your toxic waste. And so any of those 5 things is going to impact how your growth will be. Okay, all right. So in this case, this is trying to show you that in California, in the early 1900s, people used to hunt the marine mammals, right? And they would kill whales, they would kill sea lions, seals, to get their fur and also to get their blubber. And so the marine mammal population went down to very, very, very low levels. And then the Marine Mammal Protection Act was passed, and so then it became illegal to hunt these animals. And since then, they've been trying to keep track of those animals. And so you can see in the 1960s, they weren't able to tag everyone, but anyway, so but you can see the numbers were very low. And then after they tag, they can start seeing more and more. And so they have better accurate accounts, and they can now see that the numbers are going up and up and up and up. Okay, so now, because the marine mammals are not being hunted, their numbers hunting is no longer a problem for them, so they don't have major predators, and so you know, except maybe up in Alaska and polar bears and stuff, but you can actually see the exponential growth curve. Okay, so it looks like this shape. It looks like a very shallow J, and so that's why this is called the J-shaped curve. The shape J. Anytime you see a graph with a J shape, you're assuming it's going to be exponential growth curve. Okay. The opposite graph is this one, and this one, if you look, it looks like a very shallow S. Okay, and this is considered logistic growth. So what it's trying to show you is, for a while there might be exponential growth, but after the resources start becoming limiting, or you can't get rid of your waste or whatever it is, the populations will start to kind of flatten out, and you won't be able to grow as fast as you had been. And it might actually go up a little bit, come down, up and down, whatever. But eventually you're going to seem to reach a plateau. So this plateau, we draw this imaginary line back to the y-axis, and we call that number right here the carrying capacity. Okay, so K, it's abbreviated K, but it stands for carrying capacity. And the carrying capacity means this is a maximum number of individuals that this particular area or habitat that you're studying can support this particular population. Okay? And it turns out this is in nature, in most cases, you have animals that go through logistic growth. There is always going to be something that will keep them from growing to be too huge or too unlimited. All right, so logistic growth curve is the S-shaped curve. Again, the J-shaped curve is exponential. And then I didn't show you any, but there's also one more curve, and that is a flat horizontal line. And that means the population did not change over time, and we call that the zero population curve. Okay, and so so that's not usual. Okay, so here's the comparison for you to see. Okay, both carrying both exponential growth and logistic growth go through exponential growth at first, and then populations that are going to be limited to the carrying capacity go through logistic growth. Okay. So if you think about, you know, what could cause a population size to not, or what are some factors that could you know, change your population size? And so there's, of course, lots of different ones, and you can see these on here. But there is, they put them into different categories because if you have a factor, if you have a condition that kills more individuals because the population has very, very high density, then we call that density dependent. Okay, so if you have lots, so let's look at here, you've got a whole bunch of deer that live together in this one place, and if one infectious disease comes through and they're all hanging out together, then that infectious disease is going to wipe out all of them really, really quickly, right? It's going to go through that population really, really quickly. So just think about the same thing with COVID. You know, if you have a large grouping and that infectious disease comes through, they infect everyone, or goes through quickly. But if you had low density, so if you had social distancing and you had all these, you know, this deer like far, far away from each other, then the infectious diseases would not be able to go through as quickly. Okay, so that's what we mean by density dependent. So that's true also for parasites, and it's also true for predators. If you have a whole bunch of deer together in one place, and they're, you know, stuck in that one place, when a predator comes, he can wipe out a whole bunch of them all at the same time because they can't get away. Okay, and if you have more and more high density, that also means that you have more and more competition for limited resources. So if you only have a certain amount of food or water or shelter, there's going to be a lot more competition. Okay, And the same thing with toxic waste. The more in density, high density, then you're going to have more and more toxic waste built up. Okay, so that's what density dependent factors are. That these are conditions that make higher impact because of higher density of the population. And on the other hand, you have density independent factors. And so these are things that come through and wipe out the population, but it doesn't change whether or not there's high population or low population. You know, so if you have bad weather, you have hurricanes and typhoons that come through, flooding, you know, big fires, it's not coming because of high density or low density. It just comes. So I wanted to show you, so let's say these are insects, and when you look at the population growth over the year, what you see is that it seems to be low at first, and then it goes exponential through May and June and peaks, and then in July and August it seems to come down, and then basically it goes to nothing in September through December. So if you're an insect, right, why does your population increase? So think about it, May, June, July, mid-August, or almost to August. Okay, wouldn't that be our summers? So for this particular insect, they're very vulnerable to weather. So they only grow, or they only thrive when it's summer conditions, when it's nice temperatures. But when it's cold in the fall and the winter, then they all die off. Okay, so so again, this is a type of density independent. I wanted to show you one more population graph, and this one is to show you how some populations can go up and down, and that's because they have an interaction with a with predator prey. So we may mention this again when we get to predation, but and this is actually a very famous study. So in Canada, when they were, you know, developing the when people were starting to migrate through the country, one of the things that they set up they would actually have trading posts in different places. And so when hunters and when hunters would go out and they would actually catch animals, they would then sell the animal fur to these trading posts in exchange for food. Okay, so this was back when, you know, the country was still developing. And the trading posts actually kept really good records of how many animal fur came in and they had traded. And so historians have actually gone back to look at those invoice books, and they made a graph. And so here's in blue is the snowshoe hare, okay, and then the red is the lynx. And so this is a natural prey. The hare is a natural prey for this lynx, okay. And so they were very surprised when they see that you can actually see the rabbit or the hare population goes up and then comes down and then goes way up and then comes down and then goes up again. So it oscillates. It seems to oscillate, right? But when they looked at the lynx population, same thing. It also oscillates, but it oscillates a little bit later than wherever the rabbit was. Okay, and so this actually makes sense. So if there was plenty of food, the rabbit population would go high, make lots and lots of babies. And because there's lots and lots of rabbits, then the lynx would then be able to hunt them, and they would also then have lots of food. And if they had lots of food, then they would increase their population size and have more babies. And so then as their population went up and up and up, that meant there was more predators to catch the rabbits. And so the rabbit population would then go down, down, down. And so as the population of rabbits went down, there's less food for the lynx. and so the lynx then would not be able to survive as well, and so some of them would die, and then they wouldn't have babies. And so if the lynx population went down, then the rabbit population would start going up and up and up, because there's not enough predators, and so their population would go up. And then after that, the lynx would follow. Okay, so you get the idea. So it goes up and down, up and down. And so this is very common now. If you study a very specific prey species compared to the predator species, they're very tightly intertwined or connected. Okay, so the next big topic that we want to talk about is survivorship curve. So I mentioned it once before when I was talking about human demographics, but we are going to look at the survivorship curve for not just humans, but for all kinds of creatures. Okay, so on this graph, you can see the age span of, so time on the x-axis here is the age span, and then the y-axis here is percent of individual survivors. Okay, and so again, we mentioned when we looked at humans, we actually have a very flat horizontal line in the beginning of our life, and it's not until like we hit 60, 70, 80 that we start seeing this survivorship curve go dramatically downward, right? And you know, usually by age 100, you've lost most of the people. Okay, so that is called the type 1 or the late loss survivorship. Okay, and then down here in green, you can see the opposite. In this picture, it shows that the line goes straight down, okay, in early childhood, and it goes down, 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 down until anyway, maybe a third of their age span. And then from then on, it seems to slow down. And so then basically once you hit adulthood for these creatures, then they tend to stay around, and then they have pretty good survivorship then from then on out. Okay, so this one is called the type 3 survivorship, or the early loss survivorship. You lose majority, like 90% of all individuals within the first, I don't know, 25% of their lifespan. Okay, and then the third type here that I'm talking about here is the red line, and this one is a straight line, okay, that goes diagonal, and we call this the type 2 or the constant loss. So it doesn't matter what age that creature is, they seems to have a very particular percentage of death in every age. All right, so now we're going to go through why that is, and then give you some examples to think about. So I rewrote here type 1, or the late loss is for humans and large vertebrates. And then we're going to compare that to the early loss, or type 3, which hits fish, invertebrates, and plants. So when we look at them and we think about all the creatures that do type 1 versus type 3 survivorship, there's some patterns that turn out. I mean, there's some patterns that we can see, and so we're going to talk about this right now. So this is to show you, the left side is what we're going to talk about, called the type 3 characteristics, and they're called the R-selected species, okay, or opportunistic species. And then we're going to contrast that with humans, which is the type 1 survivorship curves, and we are considered the K-selected species. We are also sometimes called the equilibrium species because we live at our carrying capacity. So let's look at, okay, so the first one I've got is the opportunistic strategy, or for this R-selected species. And so again, we're talking about weeds, we're talking about fish, maybe little turtles, but typically the individuals reproduce they mature really fast, and they reproduce. And when they reproduce, they will make lots and lots and lots of babies. Okay, so you think about insects, they can make thousands of babies. The populations tends to grow really, really quickly whenever the conditions are right. And then, but then they also die really quickly because of the conditions. Okay, so they tend to be just like the insects I showed you. If the weather is really, really nice, they will grow lots and lots and lots of babies and expand their population. But when the weather goes bad, then they will tend to die. Okay, so so we just mentioned that. Reproducing very, very fast whenever the conditions are right. Okay, and when you make lots and lots of babies, when the conditions are right, those babies grow very, very quickly, and they start to reproduce at an early age. And so the main thing here is you want to make lots and lots and lots of babies. Okay, but what happens is you tend to see an early loss survivorship curve, and they're going to be very affected by the changing environments. So so I'll tell you a story. I usually talk about the sea turtles. So if you guys ever watch the Disney movie or Finding Nemo or something, you know that that sea turtles actually live a very, very long time. But when they go to make their babies, what happens is that the females will climb onto an island or to a beach, and they will make a very, very large hole to make their nest of eggs. Okay, and so what happens is the eggs will hatch, and you'll get lots and lots and lots and lots of babies. But the female's not there to help take care of them, so the babies are on their own, and they have to try to run to the water, okay, from the sand. But sea turtles' legs are made for swimming. They're not made for running on sand. And so as they're running to the water, what happens is lots and lots of birds will eat those baby turtles. And so lots of babies will die before they run to the water. But as soon as they run to the water, then the ones that make it to the water will actually survive for a very, very long time, because they don't have very many predators once they've gotten bigger and they're swimming fine. Okay. So that would be an early loss. On the other hand, you've got equilibrium strategy, and these are the creatures that we call the K selection. Okay, so this is for humans. Any large primate, any large vertebrate mammal actually does this. So it takes us for a long time to actually develop to sexual maturity. When we reproduce, we only have a couple of babies, or a few numbers of babies, and we have very, very intensive care of our young. Okay, so we typically will live in a very stable environment. We're not going to be affected by weather conditions so much, and our population size doesn't go up and down dramatically, right? Okay, so so putting this together. So again, babies are born, but they develop slowly, and you have very intensive care. So think about, for humans, right? It takes 9 months for a pregnancy, so that's a very long time, and so you have a very strong bond. And then the baby, it takes them, quite a while to grow up. So maybe 12 years to 35 years, whatever it is in your family. But anyway, so your parents are taking really good care of you. They provide the shelters for you. They provide the food. So you have good care of these babies. And then, and because we need to have so much care, we don't have many babies at a time, right? So what we end up doing is our population tends to be close to our carrying capacity size, and we try to be very, very good about trying to get our resources, our food and our water and our shelter, right? Okay, so I'm switching now to talk about the actual population growth of just human population. And so right now we have 7.8 billion people on Earth, okay, and that's a lot. And if you went to look at the growth curve, you know, if you plotted this for historical purposes, you can see that, so starting 10,000 BC, you can actually see that it was really, really flat. It was basically almost zero, right? Really, really low numbers for a long, 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 long time. And then it started to gradually increase. And so we have some gradual increase. And so again, it has to do with what kinds of culture we had. So 8,000 BC, so 8,000 years ago, or really it's 10,000 years ago now, we had an agricultural revolution. So that meant that we were able to start, instead of being nomads, we would actually farm the land and we start growing crops. And by having enough crops, we could feed our own family, right? And so your family could grow and you have pretty steady food. And so that increased. But here in the 1800s, what happened was the Industrial Revolution occurred. And that meant that steam engines were able to start harvesting your crops. Okay, so you have a lot more efficient ways to grow more crops and harvest them. And then we also had steam engines, which then would able to give us trains to ship the food in different places. And we also had ships that would go around the world. And so you started to have lots and lots of trading where ships from one place would bring one type of food to another port, and then they would trade for different kinds of goods that that port makes and then move on. And so by looking at this growth chart, you can see that when the Industrial Revolution came, it had huge impact on our human society. It allowed us to basically have unlimited resources. And so you can see that we were then able to go through this J-shaped curve, okay? So, so we've grown exponentially for the last 2,000 years. And, you know, and so the question is, how far is that curve going to go? Because in nature, we see that some creatures do have exponential growth at first, but eventually they all go into logistic growth conditions. Okay, and so that's what we're trying to kind of figure out. So this insert here is to show you how many years it took us to basically increase our population by 1 billion. Okay, so from between well, historically, it took us 1 billion years to get to the first billion. And then, sorry, I said that wrong. Anyway, we didn't hit our first billion until 1800. And then, but it only took us 126 years to get to our second billion. Then it took us 30 years to get to the third billion. Then from then on, it took us 14 years, 13 years, 12, and 12. Okay, so, and we're almost to the 8 billion mark. So what you can see is that it's, you know, decreased the number of years, and almost we're like every dozen years we're going to hit another billion. Okay, so people are kind of afraid, you know, can we do this? Can this really happen indefinitely? Can we be increasing exponentially indefinitely? Okay, I just wanted to point out the bubonic plague went through the world, and you can actually see that it made a big dip in the population. So it wiped out 1/3 of the population of Europe at the time. So that made a big dip. So we don't know how COVID is going to do for our growth curve. Again, I don't expect you to memorize all this, but a lot of this stuff I think is interesting, and it will be important for you in your lifetime, because this is, you know, this is happening to us as humans. We are definitely seeing huge population growth in certain places, not in US, but in other places. And, you know, the numbers are going to keep on increasing. So you can see by the colors, the ones that have negative growth are in this, I guess that's a mauve color. The gray has 0 to 1%, so that's what US and Canada has, and parts of it, Europe has. And then South America and Mexico are seeing 1% growth, but then other countries are seeing 2% and also more than 3%. Okay, so you can see most of Africa is the place where a lot of the growth the growth rate is increasing. And so there's been lots of studies, and different, you know, population biologists come up with different projections. So some people are worried that you know, within the next 30 to 50 years, we're going to be hitting really high numbers, right? So we've already passed what was the projection of 7 billion, and some people are thinking that we'll go to 9 billion, but others are thinking that we might go even higher than that. So I just went and grabbed a study from the Pew Research Center that they did recently, and so it was kind of interesting. So here you can see they're talking about the global fertility. So based on all the United Nations data they've collected, the research center actually put together these projections, and so they're seeing that right now we're really at 2.5% growth rate. Birth rate. So that means for every woman, she's having 2.5 babies, you know, average out. But they're thinking that eventually it'll go down to 1.9 babies per woman, and that is less than the replacement rate. Okay. And then because our healthcare system is pretty good, we're keeping the people alive longer, and so right now we have a median age in the world at 31, but it's going to be 42 within your lifetime. Or sorry, at 2100. Okay, and then what they're noticing is that most countries, the growth rate is going down, but except for Africa. So Africa is actually increasing, and the population growth in Africa is going to be very, very strong. And so so when you compare in 1950, these circles represent the number of peoples in those continents, but it's predicted that by 2100, the Africa population will be almost as high as Asia, whereas these others will be much lower, okay, and almost stable. Okay, so again, I don't expect you to memorize those last two slides, but I just want to kind of give you an idea of what, you know, people are projecting for human growth patterns. And then associated with that, the other thing that population biologists will study for humans is to actually look at the age, the number of people at certain age groups, okay? And what they notice is that if you are a country like Mexico, where you actually have lots and lots of people that are young, and those people then can start working, and they will also start to have babies, you will get a pyramid shape, a triangular shape, or a pyramid shape like this, where there's lots and lots and lots of youngsters, right? And then those youngsters are going to grow up to become reproductive and be workers. So in those countries, then the majority of the work is hands-on work, like assembly line work, factory work, because they have so many numbers of people in the reproductive and the working ages, and they have very few in the senior citizen age. Okay. If you go to a country that is very, very stable, what you see is that we do have a lot of people working, and in the reproductive age, but we're not having as many babies, and so our youngsters is not huge. It's not a big difference compared to the population we have here. But what we do notice is that there's a lot of senior citizens, and so you need to have a very stable group of people that are working in order to maintain like the Social Security payments for the people that are older. Okay, so so they're looking at this, and they can actually, like, notice, oh, Mexico is going through a rapid growth rate still, the Africa, the China, India, whereas in the United States we're much more of a stable structure. And then sometimes they see, oh, like in places in Sweden or maybe Ireland, they're actually shrinking in their babies, and so that can be a problem. So some of the sociology studies really impact what's going to happen economically in that country. So that's why people study this. Okay. All right. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about human population is that what we do in our homes, in our states, in our countries, can be quite different from what other people do in other parts of the world. So if you go to visit other parts of the world, it's quite interesting how they live, okay, compared to us, right? So we happen to have, almost every family has cars, and we rely on cars quite a bit for getting to work and doing all of our errands. And whereas in other countries, they don't use cars, they use public transportation. So so what is that? And then think about our houses. So if you look at a house in the United States, that's the whole American dream, is to own your own house and whatever. But in other countries, people don't live in that. They live in little apartments, and instead of a 2,000 square foot house for one family of four, they may only live in a I don't know, 700 or 800 square foot apartment, and they have to share. Okay, so the ecological footprint is an estimate of how many resources you use, whether it's the food that you eat, the amount of space, the amount of land that you take, the amount of fuel that you use in your car. That all contributes to how much resources we use. Okay, so this is your bonus for today. Go visit Ecological Footprint and put in how much you commute, and what kind of car you have and all that, and then get a calculation for your ecological footprint, and then try to make some changes that are like real, and then see how that changes your footprint, and see if you'd be willing to make those changes for the world. You can see the map on the top is actually the map that's based on the geography, the real geography of the countries, and then the one on the bottom here is to show you how much resources we actually use in terms of land, based on all the food and the fuels that we use. So, all right, so that should be your population PowerPoint, and hope you understood this. If not, come by to the office hours, okay? All right.